All right, so today we're diving into a story that sounds like it's straight out of a Tom Clancy novel, but it's all too real.
Yeah, this isn't fiction. We're talking geopolitics, technology, and a whole lot of tension. Buckle up.
Seriously. We're going deep on how Jake Sullivan, the U.S. National Security Advisor, is basically leading a global tech war to, well, put it bluntly, to try and stop China from becoming the world's biggest tech superpower.
And the crux of it all. These tiny little things called semiconductors.
Sassy conductors.
Right.
They're in everything these days, but most people probably don't even think about them.
True, but they're the brains of our smartphones, our computers, even a lot of military tech. And that's why this whole thing is so important. It's about who controls the future of, well, everything.
So to get to the bottom of this, we're digging into excerpts from this Wired article, super catchy title, by the way, "The American Who Waged a Tech War on China."
Gotta love a good title. But yeah, it's all about Sullivan and how he went from, get this, a free trade advocate to, well, the guy leading the charge to curb China's tech ambitions.
Yeah, it's quite the journey from what I've read. So picture this. Young Jake Sullivan at the dinner table with his family in Minnesota. Right there in the middle of it all. Not a bowl of mashed potatoes, but a globe.
Okay, I'm intrigued. A globe at the dinner table.
You see, his parents were all about making geopolitics a family affair. Dinnertime conversations were basically crash courses in international relations.
Wow, talk about a unique approach to family bonding. But hey, it obviously left a mark on him.
Totally. Fast forward, and you see Sullivan's early career is all about this fascination with global affairs. Rhodes Scholar debating global issues, advising Hillary Clinton on foreign policy. The guy was practically destined for this role.
Okay, so we've got a guy who's clearly brilliant, deeply interested in the world, but here's the kicker. Early on, he's all about free trade, especially with China.
Right. That was kind of the prevailing thought back then, wasn't it? The idea that economic ties will prevent conflict, build cooperation.
Exactly. Everyone wins, right?
Right.
Well, that was the hope anyway. But something shifted for Sullivan.
A big something. He's seeing firsthand how China is using technology, often powered by U.S.-designed chips, in ways that, well, let's just say it's not exactly promoting freedom and democracy.
And this isn't some abstract idea for him. We're talking about Chinese supercomputers using American technology, engaging in mass surveillance on their own citizens, even targeting specific ethnic groups.
Yeah, it's one thing to talk about the potential downsides of technology in theory, but it's a whole other thing when you see it being used to erode human rights on a massive scale.
And that's where the penny drops for Sullivan. This realization that America's technological advantage could be used to strengthen authoritarianism, that was a turning point.
He basically realized that falling behind technologically wasn't just bad for business, it was bad for America's global standing, its security, everything.
He saw the writing on the wall. Tech dominance was the new battleground, and the U.S. couldn't afford to lose.
So how do you wage a tech war? It's not like sending tanks or anything like that.
That's what makes this whole thing so interesting. It's a different kind of battle, right? Sullivan's strategy, well, it's all about maintaining America's technological edge. That's a big one. But also, he's got to get other countries on board who are worried about China, too.
Right, because going in alone in the tech world, that's not really an option these days, is it?
Not if you want to stay ahead of the game. So when we talk about safeguarding U.S. tech, think of it like this. Strategic investment, yes, but also very carefully controlling what actually gets shared with the rest of the world.
Okay, so less about building walls, more about being smart about what we share.
Precisely. And a prime example of this is the THIPS and Science Act. Biden signed it back in 2022, pumped billions into boosting how we make semiconductors here in the U.S.
Basically making sure America stays on top when it comes to actually producing these essential tech components. So where does the control part come in?
That's where things get even more interesting. The Biden administration, believe it or not, they took a page out of the Trump playbook on this one. Remember all that stuff with Huawei?
How could we forget? That was a whole thing.
Well, it turns out even rivals can have a good idea now and then. The Trump administration, they use this thing called an entity list, which is basically a blacklist.
Right.
And then there's the foreign direct product rule.
Foreign direct product rule. Okay, that sounds a little intimidating. What's that all about?
Imagine you're baking a cake, right? But instead of just using stuff from your own pantry, you got some special ingredients from a friend. Now your friend says, hey, you can't use those ingredients to bake a cake for someone I don't like. That's kind of what the foreign direct product rule is like.
So even if something's made outside the U.S., if it uses American tech, the U.S. gets to say, in who it's sold to.
Exactly. It's like having a long-distance leash on your tech, even when it's not on your turf.
So Biden's team, they're basically taking that idea and using it to limit China's access to those super advanced chips.
You got it. They realized to really make this work, they couldn't just focus on American companies. They needed to influence the entire global supply chain.
Which, if I'm not mistaken, is insanely complicated when it comes to something like semiconductors, parts coming from all over.
Exactly. It's a global web. And that's why Sullivan's next move was crucial, getting specific allies on board. And he went straight for the big players, the Netherlands and Japan.
Why those two countries in particular? What makes them so important in all of this?
Well, they're key players in the whole chip-making game, each in their own way. The Netherlands, they've got this company, ASML, and get this, they're the only ones on the planet who build these super specialized machines. They're called EUV machines. And you need them to make the most advanced chips out there.
EUV machines. Okay, what makes them so special? Lay it on me.
Think of them like insanely precise, super high-tech printing presses. Only instead of ink, they use ultraviolet light to etch these tiny, intricate patterns onto silicon. And those patterns, they're what create the transistors, the tiny switches that make all the digital magic happen.
So no EUV machine, no advanced chips, period. And Japan, they're a big deal in chip making too, right?
Oh, absolutely. They've got a long history in the semiconductor world, leading producers of the materials and a lot of the other crucial equipment you need to actually make the chips. So between the Netherlands and Japan, you got a seriously powerful duo.
Okay, so no pressure, right. But Sullivan has to somehow convince these countries to get on board with a strategy that could potentially hurt their own tech industries.
It was a tough sell, that's for sure. Both countries, they knew about the risks of China getting ahead in tech, but they've got their own economic interests, too. No one wants to be on the losing side of a trade war.
So how did he pull it off? What convinced them to side with the U.S.?
A combination of factors, really. There was pressure from the U.S. for sure, but I think there was a genuine concern about some of China's actions on the world stage. And then there's the fact that aligning with the U.S. on tech, it has its own perks.
Perks, huh? Like what?
Well, for starters, closer ties to the U.S. tech sector are nothing to sneeze at, right? Collaboration, knowledge sharing, getting in on the latest advancements. Plus, there's power in numbers. Presenting a united front against China sends a very clear message. Good luck trying to divide and conquer.
Makes sense. So going back to those ASML machines, those Dutch crown jewels, how did Sullivan actually get the Netherlands to essentially agree to limit China's access to them?
Well, he told a story.
A story.
Yeah, a Japanese parable, actually, about 3 arrows. A father gives each of his sons an arrow and tells them to break it. Easy enough, right? They all snap them. But then the father bundles 3 arrows together, and they can't break those. The moral of the story, there's strength in unity.
Okay, that's actually a pretty good story to use in a high-stakes tech negotiation.
It got the point across. The U.S., Netherlands, Japan, they're stronger together, especially when it comes to China's ambitions.
And it worked. They actually agreed to restrict those exports.
They did. Big win for the U.S., and it really shows Sullivan's diplomatic skills. Getting that kind of international agreement, it's no small feat.
Okay, but I can't imagine China's just going to take this lying down, right? They've got to have some tricks up their sleeves.
Oh, absolutely. They haven't just been sitting idle. China's response has been pretty strategic, actually. One of their moves has been to put their own restrictions on exporting some key minerals, the kind that are essential for, you guessed it, making semiconductors.
Ah, so it's a game of resource chess now.
Exactly. You want to restrict our access to chips? Well, we'll restrict your access to the stuff you need to make them.
Makes sense. But we all know these things aren't foolproof, right? There are always workarounds if someone's desperate enough and has enough money.
Very true, and we've seen reports about that already. A black market for chips is popping up. Companies getting creative, to put it mildly, to get their hands on what they need.
Yeah, where there's a will and a profit to be made, there's usually a way. But let's be real, China's been preparing for this kind of thing, right?
Absolutely. They've been investing heavily in building up their own domestic chip production for years now.
Playing the long game, trying to become less reliant on anyone else. So where does that leave Sullivan's strategy? Is this sustainable?
That's the million-dollar question. There are definitely some experts who think these restrictions could backfire.
How so?
Well, the thinking is that by doing this, the U.S. might actually be speeding up China's timeline to becoming completely self-sufficient when it comes to tech.
So it's like a gamble either way. You try to contain them, you might actually be helping them in the long run. But then again, just letting them have unrestricted access to advanced tech, that's not really an option either.
It's a tough spot to be in, no doubt. And this all kind of ties back to the bigger picture of Sullivan's strategy, which is building these tech alliances.
Right, the allies with benefits approach we were talking about.
Exactly. He's trying to create this network of countries, not just to counter China, but to really reshape how the global tech landscape looks.
And we're already seeing that play out with the Netherlands, Japan, and we talked about India too.
Yeah.
He seemed like a pretty natural fit for this, given, well, their history with China and the fact that their tech sector is booming.
Yeah, on paper it makes sense.
Yeah.
And there have been some concrete wins from this partnership. Deals for semiconductor assembly, jet engine production, even stuff in space exploration.
Sounds promising, but I'm guessing there are some complications.
There are always complications. Look
Yeah.
at India, for example. The U.S. is out there calling them this essential democratic partner, right? But at the same time, Modi's government is getting hammered with criticism over human rights. Internet shutdowns, accusations of using spyware against journalists.
So the U.S. is partnering with a country that's doing some of the same stuff they're criticizing China for? That's a little awkward, to say the least.
It really highlights how messy international relations can be.
Yeah.
You've got your values and then you've got your interests. And sometimes they clash. It makes you wonder if it's really possible to promote democracy while also teaming up with countries that don't exactly have the best track record.
Yeah, and it's not just India. We've got Vietnam, too. Super important strategically because of where they are, right on the South China Sea. But their record on freedom of speech, internet censorship, not great.
Exactly. And the list goes on. It seems like in this new tech-driven world, the U.S. is having to make some tough choices about who they're willing to partner with.
Which brings us to the even bigger question of what all of this means for the future. Will this tech war just end up splitting the internet into different camps with different rules? And what happens to the countries caught in the middle, the ones who don't want to choose sides?
These are huge questions, and they're not going away anytime soon. One thing's for sure. There's no going back to how things were.
This is the new reality, and Jake Sullivan is right in the thick of it. Trying to steer the U.S. through this incredibly complex landscape, it really makes you think about the choices we make, the compromises, and what we're willing to accept in the name of, well, I guess you could say in the name of staying ahead.
It's a fascinating story,
Yeah.
and it's just getting started.
It really is. Well, there you have it, folks, our deep dive into the world of tech wars, global power plays, and the future of, well, pretty much everything. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep those brains engaged.